The rain was relentless that night, a thick, gray sheet against the window of my car. It matched the quiet storm inside my chest. Each drop that hit the windshield felt like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds until my escape was either a success or a catastrophic failure. The house I was leaving behind was dark, a sleeping giant in the Seattle suburbs. Every window was a closed eye, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding in its driveway. I heaved the last cardboard box onto the back seat. It was heavier than it looked, filled with books and old photo albums, the last tangible pieces of a life I was now severing. My muscles ached, not just from the lifting, but from the tension that had been coiling in my shoulders for years. I closed the car door as gently as I could, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in the dead of night. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the cold rain soak through my jacket. I looked back at the house. It was a nice house, a 2-story craftsman with a manicured lawn and a porch swing my dad had built. From the outside, it was the picture of a happy, middle-class American family, the kind of home people dream of. For me, it had become a beautiful, suffocating cage. My light was on, the window to my bedroom on the 2nd floor. I'd left it on deliberately, a small deception to maintain the illusion that I was just up late, working. Inside that room was a perfectly made bed, an empty closet, and a note on the nightstand. The note was short. I'd rewritten it a dozen times, but the words never felt right. In the end, I settled on the simplest, most honest thing I could think of. I'm sorry. I got into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my skin. My hands trembled as I put the key in the ignition. I took one last look at the front door, half expecting the lights to flicker on, for my mom to appear, her face a mask of confusion and then anger. But nothing happened. The house remained silent, asleep, unaware that its anchor was pulling up and drifting away. I turned the key, the engine humming to life, a quiet promise of a new beginning. As I pulled away from the curb, the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror until it was just another shadow swallowed by the rain and the dark. I'm sorry, I whispered again, this time to myself. 3 weeks earlier, the smell of my mom's cooking always hit me the second I walked through the door. Tonight, it was garlic and roasting chicken, a scent that was supposed to mean comfort, home, and safety. Lately, it had started to feel like bait. Ethan, is that you? Honey, my mom, Karen, called from the kitchen. Yeah, Mom, it's me. I dropped my work bag by the door, the weight of a 10-hour day as a software engineer sliding from my shoulders. The house was immaculate. As always, my mom treated our home like a museum exhibit, perfectly ranged, beautiful to look at, and emotionally sterile. On the small table in the entryway sat the daily pile of mail. It was a habit of mine to sift through it, a habit born of necessity. I saw a bill from the electric company, the corner of the envelope stamped with a gentle but firm past due. Beneath it was a pastel pink envelope, fancy and fragrant. I didn't need to open it to know it was from Chloe's favorite credit card company, the one with the astronomical interest rate. I sighed, tucking both into my jacket pocket. The anchor, that's what they called me, sometimes jokingly, sometimes not. The one who kept the family ship steady. The problem with being an anchor is that you can't go anywhere. You just hold everyone else in place. My sister, Chloe, burst into the living room, her phone held in front of her like a religious artifact. At 22, she was 4 years younger than me and lived in a different universe made of filters, followers, and curated aesthetics. Oh my God, Ethan, you will not believe the apartment I found, she said, not as a question, but as a declaration. She practically vibrated with excitement. It's in Belltown, floor-to-ceiling windows. The light for my content will be absolutely insane. I forced a smile. Sounds expensive. Chloe, it's an investment in my brand, she said, waving a dismissive hand. You have to spend money to make money. That's, like, the first rule of business. My mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile was bright and practiced. We were just talking about that. Anything for my girl's dream. Right. She looked at me, her eyes pinning me in place. It was the look she used when she was about to ask for something. Dinner's almost ready, she added, her tone light. Your father will be down in a minute. The family dinner, our sacred ritual. It used to be my favorite part of the day. Now, it felt like a business meeting where I was the sole, unwitting investor. We sat down at the heavy oak table my dad, Mark, had inherited from his parents. He was a quiet man who let my mother do most of the talking, but his silence was a weapon. It could convey disappointment more effectively than any lecture. Tonight, he seemed cheerful, which was the first red flag. So, my mom began, placing a golden brown chicken in the center of the table. Chloe has some very exciting news. Chloe beamed, launching into a breathless description of the studio apartment. She talked about the rooftop pool, the in-house gym, the concierge service. She showed us pictures on her phone of a small, white box of a room that cost more per month than the mortgage on our entire house. I listened, chewing my food slowly, feeling the familiar knot form in my stomach. I knew where this was going. It was a pattern, a carefully choreographed dance we'd done 100 times before. Chloe would have a dream, a new car, a high-end laptop for her editing, a trip to Bali with her friends to network. The dream would always be just out of her financial reach. Then, my parents would turn to me, the responsible son, the one with the stable job and the good credit score. It sounds amazing, Chloe. Really? I said, choosing my words carefully. How are you planning to afford the rent? Chloe's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She glanced at our mom. Well, that's the thing we wanted to talk to you about, my mom said, jumping in smoothly. As a family, she emphasized the last word, making it sound like a shield. Your sister has so much potential. She's on the verge of really making it big, but she needs a proper space to create, to build her brand. This is her chance. I understand that, I said. But the rent? I'll get a part-time job, Chloe said quickly. Like, at a boutique or something, just to cover my personal expenses. I almost choked on my water. A part-time job at a boutique would barely cover her weekly coffee budget. I looked at my dad, hoping for a voice of reason. He just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. It's a good opportunity, son, he said, his voice calm and steady. You have to support your sister. There it was. The trap was being set, and the bait was family duty. The landlord requires a co-signer, my mom continued, her tone becoming more direct, and someone with a stable income. Obviously, we all thought of you. I put my fork down. Mom, co-signing is a huge financial responsibility. If she can't make rent, it all falls on me. My credit would be ruined. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ethan. Chloe pouted. Of course I'll make rent. And anyway, we had a better idea. I looked from my sister's hopeful face to my mother's determined one. My dad was meticulously cutting his chicken, avoiding my gaze. A suffocating silence fell over the table, the kind that precedes an execution. We thought, my mom said, her voice soft and sweet, the way it always got when she was about to deliver the final blow, that you could help her out, just for a little while, until her social media career takes off. Help her out how? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We ran the numbers, my dad said, finally looking up. It was the first time he'd offered a full sentence on the topic, and it hit me that this wasn't a spontaneous conversation. They had planned this. They had held meetings without me. If you covered, say, 70% of the rent, Chloe could easily manage the rest with a small job. It's perfectly logical. Logical. The word hung in the air. It was logical for them. Perhaps, for me, it was a financial ball and chain. 70%. That was more than I was paying to live here, contributing to the mortgage, the bills, the groceries. It was a staggering amount of money. You want me to pay for Chloe's apartment? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. I looked at my sister. She was watching me with wide, pleading eyes. The same look she'd given me when she wanted a puppy as a kid, or when she'd crashed her first car and needed me to talk to Dad, not pay for it. Honey, my mom corrected gently. Invest. You'd be investing in your sister's future, in this family's future. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was warm, but her touch felt like ice. You're the anchor, Ethan, she said, her voice filled with a practiced, theatrical emotion. You've always been our rock. We're just asking you to hold us steady. One more time. I looked around the table at my family. My hopeful sister. My determined mother. My silent, complicit father. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They had already decided my role. Cast me in their play without ever handing me a script. The chicken on my plate suddenly tasted like ash. The smell of garlic and rosemary was no longer comforting. It was the scent of the trap closing around me. For the first time in my life, the weight of being the anchor felt like it was finally, truly, going to pull me under. I pulled my hand away from my mother's, the warmth of her touch lingering for a moment before turning cold. The dining room, once a space of shared meals and laughter, suddenly felt small and airless. Their 3 sets of eyes were on me, a silent jury waiting for a verdict I had no power to give. They didn't want my opinion. They wanted my compliance. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed on the table with the force of a slammed door. Chloe's face crumpled instantly. What? What do you mean? No. My dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He stared at me, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. My mom's smile tightened, the edges cracking. Ethan, don't be difficult. We're talking about your sister's future. I know what we're talking about, I said, my voice gaining strength. You're asking me to spend thousands of dollars a month on a luxury apartment that she can't afford. It's not an investment, Mom. It's a handout, and a massive one. It's not a handout. Chloe's voice rose, laced with indignation. It's support. It's what families are supposed to do for each other. My friend Jessica's parents bought her a condo when she graduated. A whole condo. We're not Jessica's parents, I said, my patience fraying. And I'm not your personal bank. I work hard for my money. Chloe, I have my own goals, my own future I need to save for. It felt strange to say the words out loud. For so long, my future had been inextricably linked with theirs. My savings account was the family emergency fund. My stable job was their safety net. The idea of having goals that didn't involve propping them up felt like a foreign concept. A selfish indulgence. Oh, here we go, my mom said, sighing dramatically. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. It was her signature move, the one that signaled she was shifting from gentle persuasion to emotional guilt. He's being selfish. After everything we've done for you, the sacrifices we've made. What sacrifices? I asked, the question sharper than I intended. I've paid my own way since college. I pay rent here. I cover half the bills. I buy most of the groceries. I paid off your credit card last year. Dad, I bought Chloe her car. What sacrifices are you talking about? My dad flinched, putting his fork down with a clatter. He hated when I brought up the financial realities. He preferred the comfortable fiction that he was the sole provider, the patriarch of the family. That's not the point, Ethan, he said, his voice low and gravelly. The point is, we're a family unit. When one person succeeds, we all succeed. Your sister has a chance to do something special. Being an influencer is not something special, I muttered, and immediately regretted it. Chloe gasped, tears welling in her eyes. You see, you don't believe in me. You've never believed in me. You just think I'm some stupid, shallow girl who takes selfies all day. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and ran out of the room. A moment later, we heard her bedroom door slam shut upstairs. The silence she left behind was thick with accusation. My mom glared at me, her eyes cold. Well, I hope you're happy with yourself. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I defended, but my voice wavered. I hated making Chloe cry, even when she was being unreasonable. That was the core of their power over me. They knew I had a soft spot, a deep-seated need to be the good son, the protective older brother. You're just jealous. My mom snapped. You're stuck in a boring computer job, and she's out there, trying to build a creative life, and you can't stand it. You want to see her fail. That is absolutely not true. I stood up, my own anger surging. I want her to succeed on her own terms, by working for it, not by having everything handed to her on a silver platter paid for by me. Enough, my dad said, his voice a low command. He was looking at me, his expression one of profound disappointment. It was worse than if he'd yelled, "You've upset your sister and your mother. You need to apologize." Apologize? For what? For not wanting to be financially exploited? The words flew out of my mouth before I could stop them. My mother's face went pale. Exploited? Is that what you think this is? We love you, Ethan. We rely on you. And you call that exploitation? Her voice cracked, and a single, perfect tear rolled down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. I felt the walls closing in. This was how it always went. I would state a reasonable boundary, and by the end of the conversation, I was the vilain ungrateful, selfish, cruel. They were experts at twisting reality until I was the one left questioning my own sanity. I couldn't stay in that room for another second. I need some air, I mumbled, grabbing my keys from the counter. Where are you going? My mom asked, her voice sharp with alarm. You can't just walk away from this. Ethan, we need to resolve it. There's nothing to resolve, I said, turning to face them one last time from the doorway. My answer is no. It's final. I walked out, closing the front door behind me. The cool night air was a relief, but it couldn't clear the suffocating feeling in my chest. I got in my car and just drove, with no destination in mind. The familiar suburban streets, with their identical houses and perfect lawns, felt alien. Each lighted window I passed represented a family. I wondered how many of them were playing out similar dramas. How many were trapped in roles they never auditioned for? The argument marked a shift in our home. The days that followed were thick with a heavy, unspoken tension. It was a cold war fought with slammed cabinets, pointed silences, and meals eaten at different times. Chloe wouldn't look at me, communicating only through dramatic sighs whenever I entered a room. My dad was distant, offering one-word answers to any question I asked. But my mom was the most skilled combatant. She didn't ignore me. Instead, she treated me with a cloying, sorrowful kindness that was far more punishing than silence. She'd make my favorite breakfast and then say, "I just want you to be happy, honey, even if it means you don't care about our family's happiness." She'd do my laundry and fold it perfectly, leaving it on my bed with a note that said, "Thinking of you." It was psychological warfare, designed to make me feel so guilty that I would eventually break. Meanwhile, Chloe's social media became a weapon. She posted vague, sad-eyed selfies with captions like, "So hard when the people who are supposed to support you the most are the ones holding you back," or a picture of a sunset with the text, "Some dreams are just too big for small-minded people." Friends and relatives started to text me, "Is everything okay with Chloe?" My aunt messaged, "She seems so down." The pressure was building, a slow, steady squeeze on my soul. They were isolating me, painting me as the villain in a story I never wanted to be a part of. I started spending more time at the office, working late just to avoid going home. The place that was supposed to be my sanctuary had become hostile territory. It was during one of these late nights, scrolling through apartment listings online more as a fantasy escape than a serious plant, had I started to let a new idea take root. The thought was small at first, a tiny seed of rebellion. What if I just left? The idea was terrifying. It felt like cutting off a limb. My entire identity was wrapped up in being their son, their brother, their anchor. Who would I be without them? But as the days wore on, and the emotional manipulation escalated, The idea grew. It stopped feeling like a rebellion and started feeling like a necessity, like self-preservation. I started looking more seriously. I created a new budget, one that only included my own expenses. I looked at what I could realistically afford on my own. The numbers were surprising. Without the constant drain of family emergencies, I could afford a decent place. I could save for a down payment on my own house. I could travel. A future that was entirely my own began to take shape in my mind. It was a blurry, indistinct picture, but it was filled with light and possibility. The decision crystallized one afternoon when I came home early and overheard my mom on the phone. In the kitchen, she was talking to her sister, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I just don't know what to do with him. Susan," she was saying, "he's being so selfish. It's not just the apartment for Chloe. We were hoping, once he was on the lease, it would be easier to convince him to take out a small business loan for her. You know, with his credit score, she has this whole plan for a merchandise line." I stood frozen in the hallway, the blood draining from my face. It wasn't just about the rent. The apartment was just the first step, the foot in the door. Their plan was to systematically bleed me dry, to mortgage my entire financial future for Chloe's influencer whims. They hadn't just seen me as an ATM. They saw me as a line of credit, a resource to be fully exploited until it was maxed out. That was the moment the last thread of doubt snapped. The pain of it was sharp and clean. This wasn't love. Love doesn't come with a business plan. Love doesn't strategize how to use you. I backed away silently, retreating to my room before she could see me. I shut the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The guilt that had been my constant companion evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't just leaving to save my future. I was leaving to save myself. My secret search for an apartment was no longer a fantasy. It was now an escape plan, and I was going to execute it without them ever seeing it coming. The knowledge of my mother's phone call didn't just break my heart. It cauterized the wound. The persistent, nagging guilt that had been my shadow for weeks was burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was no longer a conflicted son struggling with family duty. I was a man waking up inside a house that was on fire, and my only job was to find the exit. The next morning, I went through the motions. I walked into the kitchen, where my mom was humming a tune, a picture of domestic bliss. She placed a plate of pancakes, my favorite, in front of me with a hopeful smile. "I thought you could use a nice breakfast," she said. A week ago, this gesture would have twisted my stomach with guilt. Now, I saw the strings. I saw the calculation behind the kindness. It was a transaction. Pancakes in exchange for my future. "Thanks, Mom. Looks great," I said, my voice even. I ate them, but I didn't taste a thing. My secret mission began that same day. During my lunch break, I sat in my car in the company parking garage and made a new email address, one with no connection to my name. I downloaded apartment hunting apps to a folder hidden deep on my phone. My search was no longer a daydream. It was a methodical, tactical operation. The first few viewings were disheartening. I saw a basement studio in Green Lake that smelled permanently of mildew and desperation. I saw a modern micro-apartment in Capitol Hill where the bed folded out of the wall, practically touching the kitchenette. It felt like trading one cage for a smaller, more expensive one. For a moment, a flicker of doubt returned. Maybe I couldn't do this. Maybe my family was right, and I was incapable of surviving on my own, destined only to serve their needs. But then I'd go home. I'd walk in the door, and the oppressive atmosphere would hit me like a physical force. Chloe would be sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, sighing dramatically every few minutes. She'd taken to wearing only black, as if in mourning for the glamorous life I had denied her. My dad would be in his armchair, reading the paper, the silence around him a thick wall of disapproval. And my mom would be there, waiting, ready with another carefully crafted guilt trip disguised as an act of love. "Ethan, honey, your Aunt Susan called," she said one evening, cornering me in the hallway. She's so worried about Chloe. She said we should consider family therapy. She looked at me, her eyes wide and earnest. Maybe she's right. We need to learn how to communicate better, so you don't feel the need to shut us out like this. It was brilliant. Really. She was framing my boundary setting as a communication problem on my part, making me the one who needed therapy to fix my issues. Before, I might have fallen for it. Now, I just nodded. Maybe, I said non-committally and escaped to my room. The house became a stage, and we were all playing our parts. They were the wounded, misunderstood family, and I was the cold, ungrateful son. The only difference was that I now knew I was acting. I smiled. I nodded. I played along, all while secretly planning my exit. The duplicity was exhausting, but it was also empowering. It was the first secret I had ever kept that was purely for my own benefit. A week into my search, I found it. It was a one-bedroom apartment in Fremont, a neighborhood known for its quirky art and laid-back vibe. It was on the 3rd floor of an older brick building, nothing like the sleek, soulless high-rise Chloe wanted. The listing photos were simple: hardwood floors, big windows, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I scheduled a viewing for a Saturday morning, telling my family I was going to the office to catch up on a project. The lie came easily now. The moment the property manager opened the door, I knew. Sunlight streamed through the large living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The floors creaked a little under my feet, a sound that felt like history and stability. It smelled faintly of old wood and fresh paint. I walked out onto the small balcony. It was just big enough for a chair and a small table. I could picture myself out here, drinking coffee in the morning, reading a book, breathing air that wasn't thick with unspoken demands. This place was everything Chloe's dream apartment was not. It wasn't an aesthetic. It wasn't content for a brand. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where I could just be Ethan. Not the anchor, not the ATM, not the rock, just me. It's quiet, I said to the manager, more to myself than to her. The building has a strict noise policy, she said with a professional smile. Mostly young professionals and a few older folks. Everyone keeps to themselves. Everyone keeps to themselves. The words were music to my ears. I'll take it, I said, the words rushing out before I could second-guess them. The process moved faster than I expected. My good credit score and stable income, the very things my family sought to leverage, made me an ideal tenant. I was approved within hours. On Monday, I took an extended lunch break and drove to the leasing office. Sitting there, with the contract laid out in front of me, was the most terrifying and liberating moment of my life. This was the point of no return. Every line I initialed, every signature I penned, was a brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. I was legally and financially committing myself to my own independence. I wrote the check for the security deposit and first month's rent. The amount was significant, a large chunk of the savings I had secretly been moving to a new bank account. As I slid the check across the table, I felt a physical jolt, as if a thick, heavy rope that had been tied around my waist for 26 years had just been severed. I was floating. I was free, but I was also untethered, and the feeling was dizzying. I walked out of that office with a key in my pocket, a key to a door that was only mine. A key to a life that I would build for myself. That evening, I came home, and the performance continued. Chloe was in the kitchen, dramatically packing up some of her expensive clothes into a box. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm selling these on Poshmark," she announced with a tragic air. "If I'm ever going to get my own place without any help, I have to start making sacrifices." She held up a designer handbag. "Do you know how much this is worth? But my dreams are worth more." She looked at me, expecting a reaction. She wanted me to feel guilty, to see the hardship I was causing her. But all I felt was a profound sense of pity. She was so trapped in the narrative our parents had built for her that she couldn't see any other way to live. "That's a good idea, Chloe," I said calmly. My lack of a guilty reaction threw her off. She frowned, her performance falling flat without the intended audience response. Later that night, my dad knocked on my bedroom door. It was a rare occurrence. "Got a minute?" he asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Sure." He came in and sat on the edge of my desk chair. He looked tired. "Your mother's worried sick about you," he began. The classic opening. "About this family. We're not the same when we're fighting. We're not fighting." "Dad, I just said no to something I couldn't do," he sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's more than that, Ethan. It's about respect. It's about your place in this family. You're the oldest. You have a responsibility to look out for your sister." "I do look out for her," I said. "But there's a difference between looking out for someone and enabling them." He shook his head, a look of deep disappointment on his face. "I never thought you'd be the one to turn your back on us. You've always been so dependable." He was using my own best quality against me. My dependability wasn't a virtue to him. It was a utility, a resource. "I have to get some sleep. Dad, I have an early start tomorrow." It was an excuse, but it was all I could offer. He stood up, his shoulders slumped. "Just think about it, son. Think about the damage you're doing." He closed the door behind him, leaving me in the quiet of my room, the room that was no longer mine. I took the key out of my pocket. It felt cool and solid in my palm. My dad's words echoed in my head. "Think about the damage you're doing." For the first time, I realized he was right. I was doing damage. I was damaging the dysfunctional system that had kept us all stuck for years. I was cracking the foundation of their expectations, and it felt like the healthiest, most necessary thing I had ever done. The countdown had begun. I had 2 weeks until my move-in date. 2 weeks to pack my life into boxes, right under their noses. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in stealth and deception. I became a ghost in my own home, a phantom packing away his existence piece by piece. My bedroom, once my only private space, became my secret staging ground. The plan was simple: pack what I could in bags and boxes I already owned, and buy the rest, stashing them in the trunk of my car until the final night. Every day, I smuggled things out. A backpack full of my most important documents and hard drives, taken to my office for a project. A duffel bag of clothes, dropped off at a donation bin on my way to work, only to be discreetly retrieved and hidden in my car later. It was a slow, painstaking process. I felt like a prisoner of war, digging an escape tunnel with a teaspoon. The psychological toll was immense. I was living a double life. My mind constantly split between playing the role of the withdrawn but present son and meticulously planning the logistics of my disappearance. Every conversation was a minefield. "Why is your closet so organized all of a sudden?" my mom asked one afternoon, poking her head into my room. She'd come in to drop off my clean laundry, a task she still insisted on doing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had just finished packing away all my out-of-season clothes, just trying to be tittier. I said, forcing a casual smile. "Figured I'd clear out some of the stuff I don't wear anymore." She beamed, her eyes shining with misguided hope. "Oh, that's wonderful. Honey, it's like you're making space for new things, a new attitude." Maybe, I said, the word tasting like poison. She saw my actions through the lens of her own desires. She thought I was clearing out my life to make more room for them, for their needs. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. Chloe, for her part, remained aloof. Her tragic performance of selling her belongings had lasted exactly 1 day. When no one offered to stop her, she'd quietly unpacked the box, and things returned to normaler, our new, tense version of it. She mostly ignored me, which was a blessing. Her self-absorption was the perfect camouflage for my activities. She wouldn't notice if my room was half empty as long as the Wi-Fi was working, and her credit card hadn't been declined. My dad remained a figure of silent judgment. We exchanged pleasantries, but the warmth was gone. He'd look at me across the dinner table with a heavy, sorrowful gaze, a constant, Unspoken reminder that I had failed him, that I had failed the family. It was a heavy burden to carry, even knowing I was doing the right thing. There's a part of you that never stops wanting your father's approval, and the loss of it, even when you know it's conditional, is a sharp, persistent ache. The hardest part was the photo albums. One night, when I knew everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs to the living room. On the bottom shelf of the bookcase were a dozen thick, leather-bound albums, a chronological history of the Davis family. I pulled one out. The first picture was of my parents on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. Then came the hospital photos of me, a tiny, red-faced bundle in my mother's arms. My dad looked proud, terrified, and overwhelmed. All at once, I flipped through the pages. There I was, taking my first steps, my dad's hands hovering protectively. There was my first day of school, with a gap-toothed grin and a backpack bigger than my torso. And then, Chloe arrived, pictures of me holding her for the first time, looking down at this tiny creature with a sense of awe and fierce protectiveness. I remembered that feeling. I remembered wanting nothing more than to keep her safe, to give her the world. When had that feeling become a responsibility? When had it curdled into a resentful obligation? Tears pricked my eyes as I looked at the photos of us as kids building forts in the living room, carving pumpkins on the porch, opening presents on Christmas morning. There was real love in those pictures. There was genuine happiness. It hadn't always been this way. The dynamic of our family hadn't been born toxic. It had become toxic, slowly, over years of blurred boundaries and unmet expectations. They had forgotten I was a person and had started to see me only as a function, a utility, the anchor. My hand hovered over the albums. I wanted to take them. They were my history, too, but I couldn't. A missing photo album would be noticed immediately. It would be a red flag, an alarm bell. I slid the book back into its place, a silent goodbye to the boy in those pictures, the boy who believed that love was enough. The final week was the worst. The tension in the house was palpable, a low hum of anxiety. My family seemed to sense that something was shifting, even if they couldn't name it. They redoubled their efforts. You know, my mom said one night at dinner, "The lease on that apartment Chloe liked is still available." The manager called her. "It's like it's meant to be." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "It's not too late to change your mind, Ethan. We could be a family again." I just shook my head. "I've made my decision, Mom." Her face hardened. "Then I guess you've made your choice. US or you." It was never supposed to be a choice, I whispered, the day before my escape day, as I had started calling it in my heady, took the final load of things I could smuggle out in my car. My computer, my most prized possession, was disassembled and packed into 2 large gym bags. My most sentimental belongings, a watch from my grandfather, a handful of books, a framed photo of me and Chloe from a time when our smiles were real were hidden at the bottom. The trunk of my car was now a high-stakes game of Tetris. That evening, I did one last sweep of my room. It was stark, barren. The closet held only a few shirts and a pair of pants. The bookshelves were empty, save for a few old paperbacks I didn't care about. The walls were bare. I had taken my posters down weeks ago, claiming I wanted a more minimalist look. They hadn't even noticed. All that was left was the furnitureth bed, the desk, the dresser, and the note. I sat down at the empty desk and wrote it out on a piece of plain white paper. My hand was shaking. What could I possibly say? How could I explain that I was leaving because I loved them, but I needed to love myself more? How could I articulate that the role they had forced upon me was suffocating me, and this was the only way I could learn to breathe again? In the end, I knew they wouldn't understand. No explanation would ever be good enough. Any reason I gave would just be twisted into another example of my selfishness. So I kept it simple. Mom, Dad, Chloe, I need some time and space to figure things out on my own. Please don't try to contact me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I'm sorry, Ethan. I folded the note and placed it on the pillow of my perfectly made bed. It felt like a gravestone. The house was quiet that night, but for me, the silence was deafening. I lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding a frantic drum solo. I listened to the sounds of the house shutting down, the dishwasher rumbling to a stop, the click of the thermostat, the floorboards creaking upstairs as my parents went to bed, Chloe's muffled pop music fading as she finally fell asleep. Every sound was a farewell. At 2 a.m., my alarm vibrated silently under my pillow. It was time. I slipped on my shoes and took one last look around the room that had held my entire life. It was just a box now, an empty shell. I picked up my jacket and the car keys I had left on the nightstand. As I opened my bedroom door, the old, familiar creak sounded like a scream. I froze, my body rigid, listening for any sign that I had woken someone. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I moved through the dark house like a thief, my steps light, my breathing shallow. Each stair I descended was a step further away from the life I had known. When I reached the front door, my hand trembled as I reached for the deadbolt. This was it, the final lock to pick. I turned it, slowly, agonizingly, the sound of the metal bolt sliding from its housing echoing in the silent hall. I opened the door, slipped outside into the cold, damp air, and gently pulled it shut behind me. The soft click of the latch was the sound of my freedom, and it was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. The night was drenched in a cold, persistent Seattle drizzle. It wasn't a downpour, just a miserable mist that clung to everything and amplified the silence. The streetlights cast long, watery halos on the wet pavement. My car, parked at the curb, looked less like a getaway vehicle and more like a lonely island in a sea of suburban quiet. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The plan I'd rehearsed in my mind 100 times kicked into action. There wasn't much left to take, just 2 large, empty suitcases I had bought a few days prior. They were my Trojan horse, light and easy to carry on the way in, heavy with the last remnants of my life on the way out. The first trip was easy. I walked back into the house, my heart in my throat, and brought the first empty suitcase up to my room. It felt surreal, like I was moving a stranger out of my own home. I worked quickly, my hands efficient, my mind a blank slate of focus. I packed the remaining clothes from my dresser, my toiletries from the bathroom, the last few books I'd left as props on my nightstand. The room was stripped bare in under 10 minutes. It was shocking how little of me was actually left. My presence had been reduced to a handful of possessions that barely filled a single piece of luggage. I carried the heavy suitcase down the stairs, my muscles straining with the weight and the tension. Each step was a risk. A creak, a groan from the old wood, could bring my entire world crashing down. The house remained silent. I was on my way back for the second suitcase when I heard it. A faint sound from upstairs. A cough. I froze halfway up the stairs, my body rigid, my breath caught in my chest. I flattened myself against the wall, trying to melt into the shadows of the darkened hallway. I listened, every nerve ending on high alert. Was it my dad, getting up for a glass of water? Was it Chloe, awake and scrolling on her phone? The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the gentle sigh of someone shifting in their sleep. Nothing more. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I waited another full minute, counting each second, before continuing my ascent. The close call had rattled me, shattering my calm focus. My hands were shaking again. I grabbed the last suitcase and the heavy backpack that contained my life's digital footprint, me laptop, hard drives, and personal documents. As I started to leave my room for the final time, my eyes fell on a small, framed photo on the wall, one I had forgotten. It was a picture of me and Chloe at the zoo when she was about 6. I was holding her up to see the monkeys, and she was laughing, her face pure, uncomplicated joy. My arm was wrapped tightly around her. The protective older brother, a wave of grief, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet, washed over me. I wasn't just leaving a toxic environment. I was leaving her, the little girl in that picture who had looked at me like I was a superhero. Had I failed her, or had the family dynamic failed us both? I couldn't take the picture. It would be a clue, a sign of my emotional state. I forced myself to turn away, leaving that happy, smiling memory hanging on the wall of the empty room. I made it to the bottom of the stairs, my knuckles white from gripping the handles of the luggage. All I had to do was get out the front door, load the car, and drive away. 30 more feet to freedom. And then, the light in the kitchen flickered on. The sudden brightness was blinding. I stumbled back, dropping the backpack with a heavy thud. Standing in the kitchen doorway, silhouetted against the light, was my mother. She was wrapped in her blue silk robe, her hair messy from sleep, her face a mask of confusion. "Ethan." Her voice was thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" It's the middle of the night. Our eyes met across the dimly lit entryway. For a split second, time stood still. I saw the question in her eyes turn to dawning comprehension as she took in the scene. Me, standing by the front door, fully dressed, flanked by 2 large suitcases. The truth landed on her face like a physical blow. What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where are you going?" The carefully constructed calm I had maintained for weeks shattered into a million pieces. The adrenaline that had been fueling me turned to ice in my veins. This was it, the confrontation I had desperately tried to avoid. "I'm leaving." "Mom," I said. My voice sounded hollow, alien to my own ears. "Leaving." She took a step forward, clutching the front of her robe. "Leaving where? What are you talking about? Are you going on a trip? Why didn't you tell us?" The questions came in a frantic rush, her mind refusing to accept the reality in front of her. "Not on a trip," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm moving out." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irreversible. Her face crumpled. It wasn't the theatrical, manipulative crying I was used to. This was real. This was the raw, jagged pain of a mother seeing her son walk out the door. It was 1,000 times harder to witness. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "No, you're not. You can't. This is your home." "It hasn't felt like my home for a long time," I said, the truth of the statement hitting me with fresh pain. "Because of that stupid apartment." Her voice rose, gaining an edge of hysteria. "This is because we asked you to help your sister, Ethan. That's what families do. We can talk about it. We can figure something else out. Don't do this." She rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Don't you dare walk out that door. Do you hear me? You are not leaving this family." "I have to," I said, trying to gently pull my arm away. "Mom, you have to let me go." "Let you go?" she cried, her voice cracking. Now the tears were flowing freely, streaking down her face. "You're my son, my firstborn. You're the one who's supposed to hold us together. What are we going to do without you?" There it was, the core of it. What are we going to do without you? It wasn't about my happiness or my well-being. It was about my function, my utility, the anchor, and the ship was terrified of being set adrift. "You'll figure it out," I said, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "You'll have to." My words seemed to flip a switch in her. The grief in her eyes was suddenly replaced by a flash of cold, hard anger. Her grip on my arm tightened. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "After everything we've done for you, we gave you a roof over your head. We supported you. And this is how you repay us? By sneaking out in the middle of the night like a common thief?" "I'm not a thief," I shot back, my own anger rising to meet hers. "I'm a prisoner who just found the key. You don't want a son, Mom. You want an employee. You want a bank account. You want someone to fund Chloe's fantasies and fix all your problems so you don't have to. That's a cruel thing to say." She sobbed, though the anger in her eyes didn't waver. "It's the truth." I finally broke, the words I had swallowed for years pouring out of me in a torrent. "You don't see me. You just see what I can do for you. Did you ever, once, ask me what my dreams were? Did you ever care about my future? A future that didn't involve being the family safety net? No, because my only purpose in this house is to make sure everyone else gets what they want. The sound of our raised voices echoed in the quiet house. A light flicked on at the top of the stairs. My dad appeared, followed a moment later by a sleepy, confused Chloe. They stood there, looking down at the scene, their faces etched with shock. My dad started down the stairs. "Karen, what in God's name is going on down here?" My mom turned, her face a mess of tears and fury. "Your son is abandoning us," she shrieked. "He's leaving. He's turning his back on his own family." My dad's eyes fell on me, then on the suitcases. His face, which had been soft with sleep, hardened into a mask of stone. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was the final judgment, the ultimate condemnation. Chloe just stared, her mouth slightly agape, clutching the banister. For the first time, she looked her age, young and scared. The reality of the situation, a world without her brother's constant support, seemed to be dawning on her. I looked at their three-faced me mother's fury, my father's disappointment, my sister's confusion. This was my family, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and a profound, bottomless sorrow. "I have to go," I said, my voice breaking. I finally pulled my arm free from my mother's grasp. I picked up my backpack, grabbed the suitcases, and turned toward the door. "If you walk out that door," my dad's voice boomed from the stairs, cold and final, "don't you ever think about coming back." His words hit me harder than a physical blow. It was the ultimatum I had always feared, the final, terrible choice. I paused at the door, my back to them, my hand on the knob. This was the moment that would define the rest of my life. I could turn back, fall into line, and let the life be squeezed out of me, one compromise at a time. Or I could walk out into the rain and be utterly, terrifyingly alone. I took a deep breath, the air rattling in my lungs. "I'm sorry," I whispered, to them, to myself, to the little boy in the photo upstairs. And then, I opened the door and walked out into the night, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me in the warm, bright light of the home that was no longer mine. The rain was my only companion as I stumbled out of the house. It was heavier now, coming down in cold, stinging sheets, plastering my hair to my forehead and soaking through my jacket in seconds. My father's final words echoed in my ears, a cruel and unrelenting drumbeat. "Don't you ever think about coming back." My hands were clumsy, fumbling with the car keys. I finally managed to pop the trunk and started heaving the luggage inside. The suitcase with my clothes, the boxes from the back seat, the backpack with my digital life. Each item felt impossibly heavy, weighted down with the gravity of my decision. Behind me, the front door was still open, spilling a rectangle of warm, yellow light onto the wet lawn. They stood there, framed in the doorway like actors on a stage, watching me. My mother was openly sobbing now, a raw, wounded sound that tore at the edges of my resolve. Chloe had come down the stairs and was standing beside her, her face pale and shocked. My father stood behind them both, a silent, unmoving statue of judgment. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing down the deserted street. I couldn't look at them anymore. I couldn't bear to see the pain I was causing, even though I knew it was necessary. I ripped open the driver's side door and slid inside, the rain streaming from my clothes onto the seat. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands slick with rain and sweat. The engine turned over with a comforting roar, a sound of escape. For a moment, I just sat there, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the windshield wipers frantically beating back the rain. This was it, the final moment, the point of no return. My mother took a step out onto the porch, her voice rising in a desperate, last-ditch plea. "Ethan, please, don't do this. We're your family. We love you. We love you." The words were a knife in my gut. Did they? I didn't doubt that. On some level, They did. But their love had become a cage, a gilded prison of expectation and obligation. Their love demanded my submission. It demanded my sacrifice. It was a love I could no longer survive. I looked in my rearview mirror. My own face stared back at me. A stranger's face, streaked with rain and tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. My eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and a wild, unfamiliar glimmer of hope. I put the car in drive. The tires squealed on the wet asphalt as I pulled away from the curb. I didn't speed away. I drove slowly, deliberately. I didn't want this to be an act of anger, of slamming doors and burning bridges. This was an act of survival, a quiet, sorrowful amputation. In the rearview mirror, I watched them shrink. My mother reached out a hand, as if she could physically pull the car, and me, back to her. Chloe buried her face in her hands. My father just stood there, his face unreadable, his posture rigid. The warm rectangle of light from the doorway grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another light on a street full of houses. And then I turned the corner, and they were gone. The silence in the car was absolute. The only sounds were the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the ragged sound of my own breathing. I was alone. For the first time in my 26 years, I was completely and utterly alone. The feeling was terrifying. It was a vast, empty space opening up inside me, a void where my family used to be. But beneath the terror, something else was stirring, a fragile, flickering flame of relief. I drove through the sleeping suburbs, the streets empty and glistening. I had no destination in mind. Not really. My new apartment wasn't ready for me. My lease didn't officially start until the next day. I had planned to sleep in my car for one night, or get a cheap motel. The plan seemed so logical when I'd written it down. Now it just felt pathetic. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, a classic American refuge for the lost and the lonely. The neon sign glowed a cheerful red against the dark, rainy sky, promising coffee and a place to be anonymous. I went inside. Dripping water on the checkered linoleum floor. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile pointed me to a booth in the back. I slid onto the cracked vinyl seat and ordered a black coffee. The diner was mostly empty. A couple of truck drivers at the counter. A group of college kids laughing in a corner booth. No one knew me here. No one had any expectations of me. I was just a guy in a wet jacket, drinking coffee at 3 a.m. The anonymity was a bomb. I pulled out my phone. It was already blowing up. A dozen missed calls from my mom. A string of frantic texts. "Ethan, come back. We can talk about this. You're breaking my heart. Your father is furious. What are we supposed to tell people?" That last one hit me. Even in her panic, her first thought was of appearances, of the story they would have to tell to maintain the facade of the perfect family. Then came a text from a number I almost didn't recognize. "Chloe, where are you?" It was the first time she had texted me directly in weeks. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I say? I'm at a diner, starting my life over because the pressure of funding your dreams was crushing me. Another text from her came through. "Are you okay?" The question was so simple, so direct. It was a question no one in my family had thought to ask me for a very long time. Not, "What can you do for us?" or "Why are you being so difficult?" Just, "Are you okay?" Tears filled my eyes again, blurring the screen. I typed back a single word. Yes. It was a lie. I wasn't okay. I was a wreck. My whole world had been upended, and the emotional shrapnel was still flying. But it was also the truest thing I had ever written. Because for the first time, I was on the path to becoming okay. For the first time, I was choosing myself. I put the phone on silent and slid it into my pocket. I couldn't deal with them right now. I needed space. I needed to breathe. The waitress refilled my coffee. "Rough night?" she asked gently, her voice full of a stranger's simple kindness. I looked up at her and managed a weak smile. "You have no idea." "Well," she said, tapping the counter, "the sun'll be up in a couple of hours. Things always look a little better in the light." I sat in that diner for hours, nursing cup after cup of coffee, watching the rain slowly subside as the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. The waitress was right. As the first rays of dawn cut through the clouds, a sliver of hope cut through my despair. This was my first day. The first day of a life that belonged only to me. I had no idea what it would look like. I had no map, no compass. All I had was a key to an empty apartment and a savings account that was significantly smaller than it had been yesterday. But it was mine. The success would be mine. The failures would be mine. The choices, for the first time, would be mine. I paid for my coffee, leaving the waitress a generous tip. I walked out of the diner and into the crisp morning air. The rain had stopped. The world smelled clean and new. I got in my car and entered the address of my new apartment into the GPS. As I drove, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left for me back there. There was only the road ahead. The first few weeks of freedom felt less like a victory and more like a strange, disorienting dream. My new apartment in Fremont was a haven of quiet, a stark contrast to the emotionally charged atmosphere of my parents' house. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was a physical presence, a vast, empty space that both soothed and terrified me. For years, my life had been filled with the noise of my family's needs, me mother's constant chatter, Chloe's dramas, my father's loaded silences. Here, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I spent the first weekend in a frantic burst of activity, a desperate attempt to outrun my own thoughts. I unpacked my boxes, arranging my few belongings with meticulous care. I went to IKEA and bought the essentials: a simple bed frame, a small dining table, a comfortable armchair. Assembling the flat-pack furniture was a frustrating but deeply satisfying process. Each screw I tightened, each shelf I put in place, felt like an act of creation. I wasn't just building a bookcase. I was building a life, from scratch. But when the work was done, the silence would rush back in, and with it, the guilt. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a part of me that had been amputated. I'd be making coffee in the morning and instinctively make enough for people. I'd see something in a store that Chloe would like and feel a pang of loss. Every night, I fought the urge to call them, to check in, to make sure they were okay, to apologize for the crater I had left in their lives. My phone was a constant temptation, a landline to my old life. The barrage of calls and texts from my mother continued for the first few days, a desperate mix of anger, pleading, and guilt. Your father had to cancel his golf game. He's too upset. I hope you're happy. All alone in some strange apartment. Please, Ethan, just call me. I need to hear your voice. I read them, my stomach twisting into knots. And then I deleted them. I knew that answering even one would be like opening a floodgate. I had to hold the line. For my own sanity, I had to. Chloe's texts were different. They were sporadic and simple. Mom's a mess. Dad isn't talking to anyone. Did you really move out for good? I never knew how to respond. A part of me wanted to explain everything to her, to make her understand. But I didn't know where to begin. How do you explain to someone that you had to leave to escape the weight of their own dreams? So, I mostly remained silent. Life settled into a new routine. Work, gym, home. I cooked for myself. Simple meals that were often eaten standing up in the kitchen. I explored my new neighborhood, discovering coffee shops and bookstores and quiet parks. I was an observer, a man on the outside looking in at other people's lives. It was lonely, but it was a clean, simple loneliness, not the suffocating, crowded loneliness I had felt in my family's home. Without the constant financial drain, my bank account began to recover. I created a budget, a real one. For me, I set savings goals, a down payment for a condo, a trip to Japan. These were my dreams, small and personal, and for the first time, they felt attainable. The feeling was intoxicating. About a month after I left, I was at work when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. Ethan. It was my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister. Her voice was cautious. Your mother gave me your number. She said you wouldn't answer her calls. I sighed, leaning back in my office chair. The ambush. I should have expected it. Hi, Aunt Susan. I've been busy. Too busy for your own mother? She chided gently. She's worried sick. Ethan. We all are. She thinks you've fallen in with a bad crowd or something. I'm fine, I said, my voice flat. I just needed some space. Well, you've had your space. Don't you think it's time to end this little rebellion and come home? Your family needs you. Chloe is having a very hard time. She had to get a job. She said the last words as if she were announcing a tragedy. A job? I asked, a flicker of surprise cutting through my annoyance. Where? At a coffee shop, she said, her tone dripping with disdain. A barista. With her potential. It's just heartbreaking. She can't afford her car payment. And your parents are stretched so thin. The implication was clear. This was my fault. Chloe's hardship was a direct result of my selfishness. The old guilt, the familiar weight of responsibility, tried to settle on my shoulders. But this time, something was different. I was different. Aunt Susan, I said, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me. Chloe is 22 years old. It's normal for a 22-year-old to have a job to pay for her own car. It's not a tragedy. It's called being an adult. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never spoken to her, or any adult in my family, with such directness. Well, she finally stammered. I can see you've become very cold. No, I said. I've just built a fence. There's a difference. I ended the call politely, but my hands were shaking. Setting a boundary felt like a declaration of war, but it also felt incredibly powerful. For the first time, I had defended my new life, my new perspective, without apology. The call, however, did have an effect. The thought of Chloe working as a barista stuck with me. The image didn't fit with the curated, glamorous persona she projected online. Out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't quite suppress, I looked up the coffee shop my aunt had mentioned. It was a small, independent place just a few blocks from my apartment. A few days later, I found myself walking past it on my way home from work. I told myself I was just taking a different route. It was a lie. I slowed down as I approached, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I peered through the large front window, and there she was. She was behind the counter, wearing a flour-dusted black apron over her trendy clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and for the first time in years, she wasn't wearing a full face of makeup. She looked normal. She was wiping down the espresso machine, her movements clumsy and uncertain. A customer said something to her, and she turned, offering a small, strained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked tired. She looked stressed. She looked nothing like the carefree influencer on her Instagram feed. I stood there on the sidewalk, hidden by the reflection on the glass, and watched my sister work. I watched her struggle to get the foam right on a cappuccino. I watched her drop a lid and blush as she bent to pick it up. I watched her take an order from a rude customer, her polite smile never wavering, even as the man snapped his fingers at her. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not pity, not guilt. It was pride. She was doing it. She was facing a reality she had been sheltered from her entire life. It was messy and difficult and unglamorous. But she was doing it. She hadn't collapsed. She hadn't given up. She had gotten the job. I turned and walked away before she could see me, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. The situation was still a mess. Our family was still broken. But in that small, steamy coffee shop, I saw the first glimmer of something I thought had been lost forever. I saw a flicker of strength in my sister that I never knew existed. And it gave me a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't just saved myself. Maybe my leaving was the only thing that could have ever given her a chance to save herself. 2. Life continued its quiet, steady rhythm. Autumn bled into winter, and the holidays approached like a slow-moving storm front on the horizon. Thanksgiving was the first major hurdle. My phone buzzed with texts from my mom, each one a carefully crafted guilt missile. "The house feels so empty without you." A picture of my dad at the head of a sparsely set dining table. "Chloe tried to make your favorite pumpkin pie, but it's not the same." I spent the day in my apartment, alone, eating a microwave turkey dinner that tasted like salty cardboard. I scrolled through social media, a masochistic exercise, watching families post their smiling, happy portraits. The loneliness was a physical weight, a cold knot in my stomach. I nearly broke a dozen times, my thumb hovering over my mom's contact, ready to surrender. But I held on, reminding myself that a few hours of lonely peace was better than a whole day of performative happiness and unspoken resentments. Christmas was harder. The pull of tradition, of shared memories, was a powerful tide. I almost convinced myself that I could go back just for one day, just to see them. But then I remembered my father's words, "Don't you ever think about coming back." Had he meant it? Or was it just the anger talking? I wasn't willing to find out. Instead, I volunteered at a soup kitchen, serving meals to people who had far less than me. It felt good to be useful in a way that asked for nothing in return. The new year arrived, and with it, a sense of quiet resolve. I was surviving. More than that, I was slowly, tentatively, beginning to thrive. I was making friends at work. I started dating someone, a kind woman named Sarah who knew nothing of my family drama, who saw me simply as Ethan, a software engineer who loved old movies and hiking. My life was becoming my own. And then, one Tuesday morning in late February, I got the call. It was Chloe. I knew from the sound of her voice that something was terribly wrong. "Ethan," she said, her voice a choked sob. "You need to come. It's Dad." The world tilted on its axis. What? What happened? Is he okay? He collapsed. She cried, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. We were having breakfast, and he grabbed his chest and fell. "The ambulance is here. They're taking him to Harborview. Mom is a mess. I don't know what to do. Ethan, please, I need you. I need you." 3 words I had heard from her 1,000 times, but never like this. The usual note of petulant demand was gone, replaced by the raw, unvarnished terror of a child. There was no hesitation. "I'm on my way." I threw on my clothes, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door, leaving a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the counter. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic and blaring horns. My mind was racing. Was he alive? Was it a heart attack? A stroke? What if the last words he ever said to me were a curse? An order to never come back? The thought was a physical pain, so sharp it made me gasp. I found them in the emergency room waiting area, a small, sterile space that smelled of antiseptic and fear. My mom was crumpled in a plastic chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Chloe was pacing back and forth, her phone clutched in her hand, her face pale and streaked with tears. When she saw me, she ran to me, throwing her arms around me in a way she hadn't since we were kids. I held her tight, feeling the frantic thrum of her heart against my chest. "He's in surgery," she whispered into my shoulder. "It was a heart attack, a bad one. They said the next few hours are critical." I looked over at my mom. She hadn't moved. She hadn't even looked up. It was as if I wasn't there. I led Chloe to a chair and sat beside her. I took her hand. It was ice cold. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice calm and steady, falling back into the old role of the anchor, the one who holds steady in a storm. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't being forced into the role. I was choosing it. For the next few hours, we waited. It was an agonizing limbo. I took over, my mind clear and focused. I spoke to the nurses, got updates, and relayed the information to Chloe in simple, reassuring terms. I bought them coffee and water, which they didn't touch. I dealt with the hospital paperwork, the insurance forms, The endless questions. Chloe, for the first time in her life, let me take care of everything without complaint. She just sat there, watching me with wide, grateful eyes. My mother remained a silent, grieving statue. Finally, a doctor in blue scrubs came out to speak to us. Mark Davis's family. We all stood up in unison. The surgery went well, he said, his expression cautiously optimistic. We were able to clear the blockage. He's stable, but he's not out of the woods. He's a very lucky man. A collective, shuddering sigh of relief filled the small room. My mom finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. The anger and resentment from that last night were gone, washed away by the tidal wave of fear. All that was left was a raw, aching vulnerability. Thank you for coming, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Of course, Mom, I said. My dad spent a week in the hospital. I was there every day. I'd go to work, then drive straight to the hospital, often staying late into the night. Sarah, my girlfriend, was incredibly understanding, bringing me food and offering a shoulder to lean on without question or judgment. Her simple, uncomplicated support was a lifeline. During those long hours in the sterile hospital room, something began to shift. The old dynamic was gone. There were no demands, no manipulations. There was just a family, stripped bare by crisis, clinging to each other. I talked to my dad when he was awake. We didn't talk about the fight, or me leaving. We talked about baseball, about the weather, about the terrible hospital food. It was simple. It was normal. One afternoon, I was sitting by his bed while he slept, and my mom came in with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me. We need to talk, she said quietly. We went to the hospital cafeteria. She stirred her coffee for a long time before speaking. When he collapsed, she began, her voice barely a whisper. The first person I thought of was you, and I was so scared that we would lose him, and you wouldn't be here, that the last time we were all together was that awful night. Tears welled in her eyes. I've had a lot of time to think. This past week, this past year, I was wrong. Ethan, we were wrong. We leaned on you so hard. We forgot you were a person. We just saw you as the solution, the anchor. And when you left, we were furious because we were adrift. We didn't know how to manage on our own. She looked at me, her gaze direct and full of a painful honesty I had never seen before. You're leaving. It was the worst thing that ever happened to this family. And it was the best thing. Chloe has grown up so much. She's paying her own bills. She's responsible. And your father and we've had to learn to rely on each other again. Not just on you. I'm sorry for the way I left, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. No, she said, reaching across the table and taking my hand. This time, her touch was just warm. I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to. When my dad was discharged, I helped them get him settled at home. The house felt different. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of gratitude. As I was about to leave, my dad, looking frail but resolute, called my name. Ethan. He was standing in the doorway, leaning on a cane. What I said that night, I was angry, and I was scared. This will always be your home. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I know. Dad, I didn't move back in. I couldn't. My apartment, my life, my independence had fought too hard for them to give them up. But I started coming over for dinner once a week. The conversations were different. They asked about my work, about Sarah, about my life. They told me about their own. Chloe would talk about a funny customer at the coffee shop or a new recipe she was trying. She was still dreaming, but her dreams were smaller now, more grounded in reality. One Sunday, I was over for dinner, and Chloe insisted on showing me her new budget spreadsheet. She was proudly pointing out how she was saving up for a new camera lens. And look, she said, tapping a cell on the screen, I paid off a whole credit card. By myself. She was so proud, and so was I. Later, as I was leaving, she walked me to my car. Hey, she said, suddenly shy. Thanks, for everything. Of course, Chloe. No. I mean, she struggled for the words. Thanks for leaving. I looked at her, surprised. She gave me a small, wry smile. I was so mad at you. But I get it now. I never would have figured any of this out if you had stayed. I would have just let you be the anchor forever. She looked down at her shoes. I think I'm learning how to swim on my own. She gave me a quick hug and went back inside. I got in my car, the same car I had used to escape in the middle of that rainy night. Our family wasn't perfect. We were still scarred, still learning. The wounds were deep, and they would probably always be there. But we were healing. We were building something new, on a foundation not of obligation, but of respect, not of dependence, but of a new, hard-won love. I drove back to my quiet apartment, to the life I had built. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was driving away from something. I felt like I had to homes, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally, truly okay. The anchor hadn't been cut loose. It had just finally learned that it didn't have to hold down the whole ship to be a part of the journey.